I recently spent $12,650 replacing a heating and air unit at one of my rental properties. Now, I know there's been inflation, but this was still a shock to my system. I could almost buy a car for what I spent on a heating and air unit. And so this motivated me to learn more so that I can make better decisions with my heating and air units on my rental properties. So I called up someone who's become my go-to expert when it comes to maintenance and repairs on rental properties, Matt, the lumberjack landlord, and we talk about at least 8 improvements or lessons that I can take away and you can take away to become a better rental owner when it comes to heating and air units. And we're getting started right now. Welcome to the podcast, Real Estate Investing with Coach Carson. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach Carson. And this is a show to help you get out of the financial grind so you can spend your time doing more of what matters. Now let's get to my interview with the lumberjack landlord. I recently have a rental property where, and I'll tell you the backstory. My property manager, we do these quarterly inspections, and they noted a long time ago, probably 6 to 9 months ago, that this heating and air unit was a little older, that some of it was rusted out, but it kind of started getting more pressing. We said the heating and air kind of just do an annual inspection, and they're like, hey, this looks okay, but the ductwork has all the insulation falling off. It's leaking into the crawl space. The filter is in a really bad spot. So in the unit's a 2001 heating and air unit. And long story short, we decided to replace it. And so I actually put a Twitter post up about this. I got 3 bids. I got a $14,704 replacement bid. Okay. I got a $17,766 replacement bid. Okay. And then my low bid was $12,650. And so just to give everybody context here, I want to talk to you about this because there's a couple of things. I want to nerd out on the process of getting bids on big items like this, the heating and air specifically. But just the first conversation was like, it's been a year or two. So I've replaced a lot of heating and air units, but the prices have jumped up big time here in 2024. Everything's going up. Inflation's going up, but man, heating and air have really gone up. And so this brought me to the question that I want to discuss with you is how do we spend good money on heating and air? I don't mind spending, good money on something that's going to last for a long time. Sure. These are big numbers. Like we're talking about like buying cars here for the cost of a heating and air. And so maybe just, what was your first thought when you saw my prices come through there? Were those like crazy high? Were they crazy low? Did you have questions about it? What were you thinking when I sent that to you?
Yes. So the way I looked at it was, first thing you did was 100% correct. 3 bids. Mm-hmm. You aren't trying if you aren't getting 3 bids. You've got to get 3 bids. So that was the first thing. I was like, still my brother from another mother. He's still my guy. He's getting 3 bids. So I love it. So you got the 3 bids. That was fantastic. And then I saw the disparity in the numbers. And I'm saying, okay, how does a person that's brand new at this, not that you are, but that people watching, right? How do they understand that this is the right number? Mm-hmm. How could they ever possibly know? First thing is that you really have kind of 3 options. You can replace the system in kind, right? And that is just replacing the furnace, the forced hot air unit. And then you said you had cooling too on this thing, right?
Yeah. So this is there's a unit underneath the crawl space and there's another condenser unit outside with the tubes coming in between them.
Sure. Yeah. So you got your line sets going in between the 2. That's what those are called for those who want to be a nerd like me. But what you're looking at there is, you're typically for a forced hot air unit right now, and after the pandemic and what occurred there, with a lot of supply chain issues, et cetera, and people still trying to work through it. There are some companies that are still having trouble getting line sets, which is what connects the 2. There's still companies having trouble getting line sets. That's a problem. So a question that they need to follow up after the 3 bids are, okay, what kind of equipment are you using? Mm-hmm. If you know what kind of equipment that they're using, well, then you can even start to price that out yourself, because you can find out what that stuff is, find out what they're pricing out. Because one very fast way, it's not the best way, but it's kind of the fastest way, is if you can find out how much they're spending on material, you can ballpark what they should be charging you on labor.
Got it.
And usually the rule is, if they're spending about $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 on the material and on the forced hot air unit and the outdoor condenser and the line sets, typically a pretty good number is just taking that number and doubling it. And you should say, they're probably spending, if I'm at 14,000 or 14,700, so basically up just under $15,000, It's probably about $7,500 in materials. It's probably about $7,500 in labor.
So it's kind of quick, almost like when you're doing a math on buying a property, you kind of do the back of the envelope math. It's not going to be your final math, but it's just like when you're talking to a person and you want to do a quick math, you can say, all right, if I could search online and say that the total of all the materials here costs this much, I could at least, if they're giving me a bid of 18,000 and I know that the rough cost of this type of unit, this material is 7,000. I'm like, all right, that's off a little bit because it's more than double. And you can at least start asking more educated questions if you're like brand new or just kind of learning about it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so that puts you in a position where as you start to understand some of those things, and then because it does matter quality too, you might get this complete off-brand system and no one's like ever heard of it. And it doesn't even have an English nameplate on it. It's got some foreign language where you're just like, now I'm really scared. Where did they get these things? And they buy a pallet of them and have them shipped over type of thing.
Right.
And is it even then, do the standards then pan out? So it's important to understand, okay, what are you installing? For me, forced hot air systems, I like York. York has done a really good job. Train does a pretty good job, or some, Carrier, depending on what some of those names are that are still out there. But for me, I've only installed, those are some of the older names. But some of the new, as far as the newer names go, the ones that I've done the most installing of has really been York. It's a fantastic product. The line sets are seemingly still readily available, controls and such. And so York has just been a real winner for me when it comes to forced hot air systems.
Okay. Love it. Love the specific there. One question I had is like, I think with every brand you have like the Premier, kind of like the Lexus version, and then you got the Toyota, and so there's these, even within one brand, you have like, and I'm thinking like the bids I got here, American Standard, I think was one of the names, but then, the luxury end of that might've been Carrier or Train, or I forget who it was. They gave you like three options. Here's the extra nice brand. What is the gradient there? Like, so if somebody doesn't know anything about heating and air, why is one, within the same brand, like a lower cost and then a medium cost and a high cost? Like, does that matter? Should you be paying the high cost, or what are you actually paying for when you pay more in that case?
The best real estate answer ever, sometimes. And so where that comes into play is when you look at the different gradients of the brands, which is a fantastic question. You can be talking about cheaper couplings, cheaper assembly and things like that in the lower units. It's kind of like hot water heaters, right? We pay based on how long they last. If it's a 5-year, an 8-year, a 10-year, or 12-year water heater, it's going to go up in price based on that. The funny thing is often what you're talking about there is you're talking about, you're talking about the rods that they put in there, and then you're talking about that thin layer of metal layer at the bottom. And so how fast is that going to then rust out? So when we look at the forced hot air system side, what we're looking for is efficiency. And the way that you can look it up, and there's all these efficiency calculators online, so I won't bore people with, taking them through that for a long time. So look at the efficiency calculator and then just look at what the efficiency of the system that you're using is, and then see how much fuel was used in that. And then you can make the correlation to this one. When I first put the system in, it's an 80% efficiency. Now the ones that I'm looking at are 80, 90, and 95. And then what you can look at is you can look at and say, okay, well, the one that's at 95, that's that much more efficient system. Is it worth the extra $2,000 I'm going to spend? Because am I going to get that much more time out of it? Maybe, maybe not. The biggest indicator of if you're going to get enough time out of your systems is maintenance. You have to spend time, effort, energy on maintenance. That is I always like to say that that's the payment that you make while you own it that ensures that you can drive it with no payment.
Love it. Well, I want to go to maintenance here in a moment. I want to kind of talk about some best practices on that. So let's revisit that. But going back, so what I'm understanding, efficiency, as I understand it in layman's terms, is the fuel that goes in, whether this gas, electric, whatever, you're using some kind of energy to produce the hot air or heat, and it's turning a certain amount of that energy into the output, the heat or the cooling. So like the 95% uses less energy to do that. Is that so?
Exactly.
It doesn't necessarily, you're paying for that. So your tenant would have a lower power bill. Is that
correct?
So if they're paying for the gas, if they're paying for the electric, in the end, you're kind of doing the math as well for the tenant.
Yeah, we're doing the math for the tenant because the issue too, right, is do you have upward pricing pressure in rents if the utility bills are that much lower? Absolutely. Right. And that's what we like to do for our tenants. That's why we have over a 90% renewal rate for our tenants. is because they see the gas bill that they get and they remember where they moved from. And in the Northeast, it gets frigid for about 3 months. And so they see that bill and they're like, I paid $1,000 for heating fuel this year. My lowest bill I'd ever seen in my life was $2,500.
Wow.
So then you can do the math and say, well, yeah, you save $1,500. So the fact that I'm going to recapture some of that, right, in an increased rent, I can get up to $2,100. They're still getting a deal. And the other guy, he's charging $2,000. But very often, they're not going deep and asking those questions. So when I'm in front of a tenant and I'm essentially pitching the unit, remember the days when you used to have vacancy? It doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
But there were those days when we used to have vacancy, and I think that day will come again someday. And so when it does, you have to have a better unit than your competition. Right now, a better unit means you rent out faster. Then a better unit meant that you were the choice and the other unit stayed vacant. So that's what's changed in the market. So it is that efficiency, but we want to run that efficiency because I always like to know that in an asset that I have, and in a house and a property that I have, I like to know that if I need to sell it for some reason, I have to sell it in 30 days. I want to know that I don't have $25,000 worth of work I got to do to get the price that I should be getting for the house.
Yeah. Got it. It's kind of ready it's primed up to sell. If you were to sell it, that means you've got it close to the value you could get.
Absolutely.
So there's a bunch of variables. And so I wanted to nerd out on this because I know you think about a lot of these variables, but the efficiency is one, and we're thinking about it for the quality of our tenant. We can get higher renewals because especially if you're in a place that has, seasonal variations, like in my area, it's the summer. I've had, very inefficient units with no insulation in the walls. They had $1,000 bills in the summer for air conditioning as opposed to the winter. So efficiency is one thing to think about, but the other, I heard you going back to it, is there's going to be variability in quality, whereas you might buy one unit that lasts for 8 to 10 years and you have another unit that lasts for 20, although the maintenance, you said, is the most important part. But so going back to that, so my decision, and by the way, for everybody who knows, I had to make a pretty quick decision on this. So even before I recorded this, I went with one particular bid, and I'm going to tell Matt why I did that. But so when you choose York, so that's your brand that you like, you choose efficiency you like. Is there just one brand within that or is your what would like the brand that you end up choosing on a forced air? Is it typically more than like the kind of beginner heating and air unit line by a couple $1,000? Or what's usually the difference in price that you're choosing to pay up for to get that better brand?
Yeah, so it's not. That's the crazy thing, is it's not crazy expensive, right? So I'll use the water heater example because everybody can go right to Home Depot and look at it, right? Mm-hmm. And Lowe's and go look at it. And if you're only looking at it and it's like, a 5-year tank might cost you $400 and an 8-year tank costs you $550. And so in this case, what we're typically talking about with like a York as an example, we're typically $3,500 to $4,000 for a York forced hot air system and the condenser outside and the line set. We're usually about $3,500 to $4,000 for that installed. So, and that's obviously replacing, like you were doing, replacing an existing system. Mm-hmm. It's a tiny bit more, obviously, if it's all brand new, because then you have to add in the piping, for the gas, whether it's propane or natural. But yeah, you're typically talking $3,500, $4,000, maybe $4,500, but $3,500 to $4,500. And if you're choosing the cheaper unit, you're not talking about $1,500. You're talking about $2,700, $2,800. Yeah. Maybe to 35 or 38. So it starts to happen where that top end of the range starts to get into the bottom end of the other range.
Right. So we're talking like $1,000 or $2,000, and that's just the materials, and the labor might be pretty similar, or is pretty similar, to install the little bit better unit versus the.
Yeah, we kind of broke it down. And so what we do is when we know we're going into a place. And so if it's a replace install, like what you're talking about, mm-hmm. we know that we're going to be between $3,500 and $4,500 for the forced hot air furnace or system, the line set, and the condenser. That's installed for those 4 pieces. So what we're looking at is if we're attaching to an existing duct system, then we're probably going to be another $1,000 there, $1,000 to $1,500 there to make some modifications, make some changes. And that's if we're attaching. So you're probably talking about, that deal, probably $6,000, I'd say. You're probably in on that side. When you're talking about ripping out all the duct work, what we look at from a ductwork perspective is basically pricing it by the ton, because that gives people a pretty good indication of how big the application is. Mm-hmm. What we always talk to our contractors about is, hey guys, horseshoes and hand grenades this thing for me. Whip that horseshoe out there, and we're not going to hit the pin. We're going to just get in the general area.
Right.
And so when we're looking at ductwork, we're usually looking at ductwork that's about $2,500 to $3,000 a ton. And so if we're in a typical 3-ton system for, let's say, a 3-bed, 2-bath house, and we're looking for a 3-ton system with cooling, then we're probably $2,500 to $3,000 for ductwork. So you're about $9,000, call it $9,000 on that side of it. And you're probably, $5,000 or so on the other side of it. So your number that you got that was right around 14, that middle number is probably and you haven't told me. So, but, short of those guys showing up with a trailer and, a van that's rusted out all around, because we've all seen those. I would probably avoid the $12,000 number because I think that's a little bit light, but I think the number in the 14s is probably right on. And I think the number at 17 is he's being a nice guy and doesn't want to tell you that he doesn't want to do the project.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I think you're probably right. The 17 was not a contractor we'd used before. I think they were just like kind of throwing it out there. Yep. The 14.7 was a person we used a lot and we've used on other projects. The 12,650, I was inclined to go with the 14.7. The 12,650, I'm like, I've gotten burned with low bids before. I'm like, I'm not going to go with the low bid. But we did a little bit. I did some asking. My property manager has used the 12,650 person a lot.
Love it.
And had tons of good Google reviews when I looked them up. So I've not used them personally, but they're like, yeah, we're using them all the time. We like them, which might have been part of the reason we got a little bit better price from them. But so here's the reason I think this bid was somewhat lower was they gave 2 different recommendations on what to do with the ductwork. Okay. So the 14,704 was like, we just think we need to rip the whole thing out and just start over. The other one, and I asked a bunch of questions of the 12,650 bid. I was like, other people said we need to rip it out. You're telling they said we think we can re-insulate all the existing ductwork. We think it's laid out pretty well. We need to put 2 new return ducts in because the return is basically you have to go in the crawl space to change out filters. Like there's not a good,
that's not gonna happen.
Horrible place to put it. So anyway, like it was like basically using the existing layout, re-insulating, reconnecting things where needed. And that was the $12,650 bid. So like the big difference was using this thing versus not. I kind of had some heartburn about that. Are we going to use this existing stuff and now it's not going to be blowing out good air or something? So I asked a bunch of follow-up questions on that, and they seem professional. They seem to I think we're good on the existing duct. So that was the decision I ultimately made.
I love it.
But the other thing I'll say, just for everybody listening to this, the more money I have to spend on a maintenance item, the more time I take to make a decision. And fortunately on this one, the heating and air was working at the time, but it was ticking. The clock was ticking. I was like, man, if we get to summer here, we're going to be really in trouble. So I didn't want to wait until the South Carolina summer when it's 105 degrees and 90% humidity to deal with this issue. I wanted to deal with it now. And I had a couple weeks so we got extra, we got extra questions, we got the extra bids. So that's my recommendation to people is just when I'm not an expert on, I'm not a contractor. I've done spent a lot of money on, done a lot of remodels. But even then, I'm trying to ask questions. I'm trying to slow down. I should have called Matt and just said, hey, Matt, can I talk to you? I should have called Matt. Next time I will. We'll do a YouTube video so you can all hear it. But I guess that's my meta lesson here is that whatever it's about, like if you have a big repair, you got to slow things down because it's complicated. There's a lot of things that Matt's explaining here that, questions I could have asked. And so it's good just to slow it down, watch YouTube videos, watch this interview, before you spend $15,000 on something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, but the good news is that 17 was immediately out of your mind, which was awesome. Like that's, it's like, okay, guys, like, come on, give me a break. Mm-hmm. Like, I get it. You don't want to do the work, but you don't want to tell me. Cool, whatever. Yeah. But the difference between the 12, basically 12.6 and 14.7, the 14.7 admittedly was a premium. However, I love what the 12.6 guy did, which is, it's just like anything else, which is, hey, listen, you can replace the rotors on your car right now, but you probably don't need to. Yeah. So it's up to you what you kind of want to do here. And so I love that approach. And that actually is why my guys stick with me for so long is because I tell them, I said, listen, we're not going to limp along a dying system.
Yes.
But we are going to be penny wise and not penny wise and pound foolish. So I think that a lot of times when you look at that ductwork, again, guys can go through it and say, yeah, I mean, I can re-insulate everything that's there for like $1,500 or I can charge you $6,000 to reduct everything. It's usually not needed. And even where you have areas where you have maybe some rust or corrosion or things like that, even if you have areas that are like that, cut out those sections and resection them, put a new section, then re-insulate.
Right. Yeah.
It's not going to get hurt.
Yeah, I'm a person who's okay with like taking a nice used car and making it run for a long time. So like I'm a little okay. I'm okay with that kind of mentality. But yeah, it was one of those things where we could have spent a little bit extra, and it was a tough decision. So thank you for thinking it through with me. And the other, I've got more questions on heating and air that I think
Sure.
come up. So as a landlord, you and I in our last conversation, which I'll put a link to our it was really popular, by the way. This thing, people loved our conversation about maintenance, and I think just the fact that we got nerdy and went deep on some stuff was cool. But one of the things we talked about was getting different types of heating and air units, different applications. You talked about boilers. This is a forced air system.
Yep.
When I put this on Twitter, I got so many responses, and one of the common responses was, "Man, I wouldn't put a forced air anymore. I would go with like a mini split system." So talk to me about like these options we have in the heating and air world. We even have, I have a lot of small single units, like just efficiency units, a 1 bedroom that I actually have just like the big hotel, window kind of AC unit, which is because it's just such a small space. So there's just a lot of different applications. So let's kind of talk about the landscape of different types of heating and air units, and particularly the mini split was one that came up a ton as one that some people are using.
Everybody loves the mini split, unless you actually live in a cold area and because they can't keep up in the wintertime. Now, the technology is always advancing, and so the fastest way to price out a mini split install, this is product and install. Usually, the number that we carry is about $4,500 per head, and so that's $4,500 per head. And when you add another head, it's $9,000.
And a head is the thing inside that actually blows the air out, right?
Sits there on the wall.
And can you explain just the basic architecture of what a mini split is? Because I think just that's interesting, just because it's a different approach to getting cold air, hot air into the house than the other one.
Yeah. So basically, a mini split is it doesn't run off of gas or oil. It runs off of electric. And so very often with the mini splits, essentially a lot of the work is being done in the actual head itself, like as far as fans and things like that and blowers and such. And so they get mounted on the walls in the different units. And I just keep on looking up because I've got my walls here, but you would install them basically up on the wall. And again, it's not one of the things that you install, even though there's that cool Mr. Cool kit. I've not used one of those yet. One of those do-it-yourself DIYer things. Haven't done that yet because you can bring somebody in basically, and I think it's like 3 hours of work. So you can set everything up, lay everything out, run everything, and then they do the actual refrigeration line setup. So you bring somebody in for a couple of hours type of thing. But super impressive. But yeah, from a mini split perspective, really what you're talking about is a lot of times you have a system like what you had, Coach, which was, system goes bad. And it's like, is this the least expensive way to deliver, forced hot air or cooling and heating to a space? The challenge that you have is in a lot of parts of the country that will work and that will work great. The bigger issue is that for a lot of mini split lovers, that price has gone up tremendously. It used to be about $2,500 to $3,000 a head. And now it's $4,500 a head is the number that we carry because we've seen a lot of stuff kind of come in at that number. So as you look at the mini splits, what it also does is it's instead of having the vents in the floor and having the hard duct work to that, so much of the work is being done in the actual head. And so what you're really doing is you're running all the lines are run to that, but then you have that, cap on the outside of your house. It looks like a half moon.
Yes.
That runs up the outside and that it penetrates the wall or the building envelope. And then those lines go to the mini split. And then that's where you then have a lot of work being done from the mini split itself, the motor and blowing and all of that good stuff. So what's really cool about that setup is that you can take a house that used to have a big forced hot air system, and now you can typically make it smaller. So you can get away with one head in a 300 square foot apartment. You can get away with one head. And so now instead of having to replace, the big thing is getting people off of community heating and cooling and getting them onto individual heating and cooling.
Right.
You'll never see such a big increase in your portfolio when you start being able to do that. Now there's all the stuff that now I've gotten even nerdier and I've gotten into some of the stuff called like sub-metering.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, that's a hassle though, right? Yeah.
It's a bit of a hassle. Now there's more and more companies that are actually offering that as a service.
Okay, got it.
So now it's a percentage, but now it's a percentage where it's like, well, okay, if I still get to keep 90%, what do I care about the 10? Don't care about anymore about the 10. So there's so many of these, plumbing and heating options or airing, heat and cooling options, but from a mini split perspective, most apartments are going to be 1 or 2 heads, and most single family homes or larger units could be 3 or 4 heads.
Yeah. So in my house, for example, 1,800 square foot house, it's a 3-ton unit. Then that would have been, but the other thing, the layout was kind of weird. It's kind of chopped up. You have 3 bedrooms, you got the living room, you got the kitchen. I mean, it just, how do you distributing that air, which is something you think about a lot with the forced air system. You make sure it's very balanced out. Whereas these heads, they work really well in a small space or an open space, but they don't work really well in the chopped up spaces, right?
Nope. And so here's the thing. You're probably looking at a 3-head setup, which means you're probably looking at 13.5, which means you just did it for less.
Right.
And that's where the art of what we do when you become a lead at something, that's the art of what we do that actually helps us run our businesses better. I would have looked at that situation. I would have said, you know what? Yeah, let's quote out mini splits just for the heck of it. Mm-hmm. And so we quote out mini splits, but then you quoted out the other thing where it's forced hot air system. And then sometimes there's a combination thereof. But, I've had a building where I had a 1-pipe steam system, and that fed the first 2 floors because you can't zone that off. So it's either on or it's off. And so what we did was we basically said each side has their own 1-pipe steam, and we utilized the 1-pipe steam system for just that first floor unit on each side with their own systems. But on the second floor, we went mini split because we couldn't put in a system and ductwork and do all of that work all brand new and fresh. That would have cost me probably $12 to $13,000 per side.
Right.
And instead I'm mini split and I'm all of 9, but if I do 2 at the same time, I'm probably 8. And so I can get it done for 16 combined as opposed to 24 or 25 combined. So it's really just about understanding your options. And
then mini split also has my understanding, the benefit is just, if you're trying to fit it in tight spaces, like in Europe, yes. I see them using it a lot because if you have a forced air, you got to have the size for the duct. You got to have like the wall, or you got a duct system, or you have the attic or the crawl space. Whereas if you have very little space, it's on a slab, it's a small place, or it's an old house or something. Getting a refrigerant, the what do you call those? The refrigerant lines, the
refrigerant,
the refrigerant lines. Getting that 4 inches or whatever it is versus a big ductwork. That's a totally different installation process. So sometimes sometimes that's all you can do is fit in the mini split system.
Yeah, for the old retrofit, like we do a lot of old buildings. It's I always joke around about a young building to me is 140, not 40. So so when we're looking at something that old, we can't just, what are we going to do? We're going to have to shore up the ceiling to bring in a ceiling unit to then put it in the attic. And then, if there's ever an issue there, then you have to climb up in the attic to do any of that work. It's just like, oh my goodness. Yeah. And then from a basement, if you're talking about a second floor, well, now you're talking about bringing ductwork from the first floor, the basement, all the way up through the first floor to the second floor. Yeah. And you're looking at space and where you're putting it. And a lot of times that stuff is going by windows. Well, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to bring one up on the first floor window because they mirror each other. Mm-hmm. You bring up a pipe on the first floor window just to get to the second. No, come on. That's not how you do it. Yeah. So that's where you're exactly right. From a mini split perspective, that gives you a lot more flexibility. I think what ended up happening was I think that used to be the way to do it because it was like, this is good enough. But now it's they've done a great job. So Daikin is a phenomenal brand, and the Mitsubishi, I forget what they call it, but they have like an extra special brand, and it kind of covers you down to like 10 below zero. Where I'm from, you need to have that.
Yeah, New Hampshire versus South Carolina weather, right? That's
exactly.
A little different. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you guys live in the 90s and the hundreds in June and July, and we, we'll touch it twice or 3 times.
Yeah. Then during winter, if we get down into the 20s, we're all like freaking out. People are crazy. So
I know there's a run at the local hardware store with roof clothing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think that's so. That's kind of the other options. The other options are a lot more focused on delivery of heat. When you're up in the Northeast, you really have a boiler because the most efficient thing that you can get is usually, forced hot water where you have the radiators on the floor, and they're, 9 inches off the floor. That's usually the most efficient option. And in the wintertime, everyone's like, oh, but mini splits are so inexpensive to run. No, they aren't. No, they aren't. And especially you have no control, obviously, over how expensive electric is getting where you are. The idea is, and I'm a big proponent of, I've been searching for 17 years to do solar on an investment property project. I've never seen a return faster than 11 years, and I can't invest in something that has an 11-year return.
Right.
So
not with mechanicals that are going to break and things that you got to fix. Yeah, just doesn't.
Exactly. And what that might lock me into in the future. But then if you're looking at solar, you can say, hey, you know what? This is, and the electric companies, in a lot of places change. You used to push power up to them at the same rate that they were pushing power to you. And now when you push it up to them, it's about an eighth or a tenth of what they charge you. So it's I'm not going to give you cheap electricity.
Yeah, they've got a pretty strong lobby. If we try to selling electricity back to them it's going to be wholesale for sure.
Yeah, exactly. At best. Yeah.
Awesome. This is great. I still have, so the one topic that you mentioned was really important that I circled in my mind is the maintenance of your system. So we talked a lot about replacing systems. There's a lot to think about there, and you need to go slowly and ask questions. But then once you have a system and you buy a property, you own a property already, you said a really key thing that I want to repeat is that the most important factor in getting the biggest return on investment on your system is how you maintain the system.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about your own maintenance protocol. Like, what do you do to try to get the most life out of your heating and air systems?
Yeah. So systems up here, when we're talking about oil, good old number 2 oil, when you're doing oil, you got to clean that thing once a year. There's no way around it. You got to clean it out once a year because you're going to get a delivery of oil that was the bottom of the tank, and there's something that's sludgy, or tenants love to run out of oil and then you have to go over and restart it. And that's pulling sludge out of the bottom of the tank. That's going to just gunk things up. So if it's oil, you're going to have to clean it once a year. That's why it's kind of prohibitive. Not only that, but we also have some of those systems that exist. And when you get I don't have any heat, guess what? You're going out in the field, you're bringing 5 gallons of diesel, you're putting that thing up, you're bleeding it through the system, and you're getting them heat for the night until you can get a truck there in the morning where they can actually get some more heat. And if they're not your favorite tenant, then you just say, call the emergency line and pay the $300 fee for, we'll call that a dumb tax. But when we talk about maintenance, really what we're talking about on the forced hot air side very often, and even on the mini split side, it's really all about filters. And too often people, they're like, I can change out the filter once a year. I mean, come on, it's $4.
Right.
And if you know what system you're buying, go on to one of the websites and buy 20 of the filters, and then you can change them more often because they're just sitting there. And so the thing that I recommend the most, we have one building that's actually a daycare. We change all of the filters, and it's 4 by 20 by 20 filters. It's 16 of them. We change that every 90 days. It helps prolong the life of your heat exchanger because what it's actually doing is it's sucking air into the system. And if it's sucking in dirty air or clogging your filter, then you're not bringing enough air, pushing it over the heat exchanger to then blow that warm air into the space. So that makes your system work harder. It tires your system out. And we actually had a building that we bought. And the reason we were able to buy it for a pretty reasonable price was because they had fried 5 air exchangers all at the same time because there was no air getting into the system, and everyone was complaining that it only blows cold air. It doesn't blow hot air. That's the issue. It's not pulling enough.
Okay.
So when we look at that, we just really talk about filters, which is buy whatever size filter it takes, swap it out every, 6 months to a year. I think a year is too long, but I would do it every 6 months. Right. If you really want to be good, every 90 days. But that largely is going to keep that thing going. And then from a maintenance perspective, the big mistake people make is they'll put a new motor in a 30-year-old car. That's a mistake. Okay. Unless it's a resto mod, that's a mistake.
Okay. So whenever the motor goes out in the actual unit, you're putting a new motor, and the rest of the components might break anyway. Is that what you're saying? That's
exactly right. So what you're doing is you're basically putting a brand new motor in a car that has 30 years worth of use on the body, 30 years worth of use on the frame, on the, and go right down the list and the other systems. So the thing that I recommend always is, when somebody gives you that quote, here's where relationships are important, and having vendors that you used in the past are important. If you know who you can call in an emergency and you post that to them, you pose that to them when you're asking them, in a case of an emergency, am I able to call you? And if they say yes, then they go on your list. If they say no, then they're not. But the key to this whole, scenario is, hey, that blower motor goes. Why does it go? It goes when it's being used. So it's going to go in June. It's going to go in July. It's going to go in August. Right. The question is, how much is the part? Can you get it? Do you have it? And what's the install going to be? If they come back and they go, it's $1,800, but then you get a brand new system for $3,000 or $3,200. Well, guess what? We have temporary heat that we can bring to people. We have temporary cool that we can bring to people. We install it, we put it in, and then they're able to keep temp there. but then it gives me the week that it might take for them to get the system in and then do a hot swap. But now I didn't make a bad decision because I needed it.
Got it. That makes sense. So from a maintenance best practices, we're going to change filters out. This is nice that the answer is pretty simple there. And so if you have one rental, or if you have 50 rentals or 100 rentals, you're going to be building some kind of system to get in there every 6 months is preferable, minimum a year, every year, maybe 90 days in some cases. And just to give people a context, like I have property managers that this is something you can work with your property manager. We have one who charges us a pretty small inspection fee where they send like a college student out there for $25 and they just take some pictures of the property. They send us a little report, but they bring along the air filters for that particular unit. They go ahead and change them out. And that's just, you can, it doesn't have to be you. You could pay people to do these for you and then take some pictures and look at it. And we find little things we need to have. And so that's one way to do this, even if you're not doing it yourself. The other thing that I've heard, a lot of heating and air companies will do an annual plan where they'll say, we'll come out once or twice a year for $150. And then I know they change the filters out, but they also check things, they clean the coils. And so is that worth doing? Is that part of a good maintenance practice as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest one is the filters. That's the easiest one. Because then the other ones, you can still get in there, you can still clean the system. But yeah, I recommend that, on a gas system, actually cleaning, going through that's probably an every couple of year thing. Some people are like, it's gas, you don't need to do it. No, you should still do it every couple of years. Make sure that it's right. But yeah, the filters are the biggest thing. There's something that's easily managed by whether you're doing it through a property manager, you're doing it yourself. That's something that's pretty easy to change. And that's something that, again, if you're doing an annual inspection, that's something that's absolutely worth doing. And it's what's absolutely going to get you more life out of the system for sure.
So Matt, is there anything I didn't ask? I know we dug into buying new systems, my own bids that I had on my property. We talked about maintenance. What else? Is there anything else you would give people about heating and air units for their rental property?
Yeah, I think it's different. So as you grow as a company, right, where people are investing in rentals, the idea is you want to not just look at this as a solution for your one house. You want to look at this. I need essentially a path or a strategy for as I expand, I'm going to keep on adding the same system. And that's why having a good system. Most people get shocked when I say I have 600 appliances, but I have 600 appliances. So I'm very brand loyal because what does that mean? That means that when I have a washer that dies, there's still a bunch of parts on there. I can literally put that one washer in one spot of a garage. And then it's like, hey, this next one had a problem. Oh, it wasn't the same problem. Well, that's all right. We have this one sitting over there. We can take the parts right off of it. It allows me to hot swap. And so we use a lot of combi boilers, which are a combination on-demand hot water and forced hot water. We use a lot of those because up here in the Northeast, it gets really super cold, but they're 95% efficient. But I have 33 of exactly the same model. So guess how often I'm down? Basically, with those systems, never. In the last 7 years with that model, we've been down twice. We were back up and going within 2 hours. It took the plumber longer to get there than it did for this part to get swapped.
That's incredible. That's a whole nother level that I aspire to as well. Like when you can think about your business as like interchangeable parts, and you can think about the appliances. You know how many appliances you have. You know the model numbers. You know the types. That's. I hope people take that to heart because that's something that you don't start off with, but if you treat it like a business, you treat this rental property thing like a business, that's the kind of level you need to get to. So that's really cool.
Yeah. We teach people a lot, document your unit. And that's one of the things we teach in our course is how to document your unit, how to document it correctly. That way you can hold your property manager accountable. And if for some reason you're losing a property manager, you still have all the data and you don't need it from them. You have all the things that you need to then pick the person that is most effective at carrying out a task as opposed to the person that's necessarily managing and you're paying them to manage.
Yep. This has been fun, Matt. I appreciate your time on this. Tell people where they can hang out with you. I know you have a YouTube channel, which we'll put a link to in the link in the YouTube and podcast description below, but I know people will want to connect with you after they listen. Yeah.
Lumberjack Landlord on YouTube and Instagram. And on Instagram, we're doing updates every couple of days on a police station jail that I am rehabbing and turning into disabled vets housing and indoor playground for kids. And so, your community is absolutely awesome. So it was a blast to be able to do this again with you and look forward to many more fun ones like this.
We will do it. We got a lot to talk about. So good luck with the prison. And I look forward to seeing, I'm going to be following along as well. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. In this episode, we went really deep on one part of a rental property, the heating and air unit, but there's a lot of other things you have to think about in order to buy or maintain your rental property. So in the next video, I talk about my ideal criteria for a rental property. This is all about a buy box, identifying what location, what type of property, all the details, the materials, some of the things we talked about today, but it gives you a comprehensive list of what my criteria are for a rental and also encourages you to build your own list of criteria. So check that out. There'll be a link above me here if you're watching on YouTube, and you can also find it in the podcast and the YouTube description below. See you in the next video.